Everyone was told, from Rupert Murdoch, from Fox, to every studio, look, if you touch this thing, you will be out, you will be done. You'll be finished in 3 years.
The message went out to every major studio in the country. Not a suggestion, not a conversation, a message. No name attached to it. No meeting on record. Just a deadline, delivered to every executive in Hollywood who was paying attention. And almost all of them listened. A film sat on a shelf for 5 years, $14.5 million, a finished product, a real story with real fieldwork behind it. Nobody would touch it. Here is what that film was about: rescuing children from documented exploitation networks. Not a theory, not a political statement, a finished film based on real operations, real rescues, real fieldwork conducted across Latin America. Every major studio passed. Disney acquired it through a $71 billion corporate purchase and shelved it. A spokesperson said they had no knowledge of the film. Netflix passed. Amazon passed. The producer went back and negotiated to buy the rights back himself. And the man whose name was attached to that film, the man who had been inside the story, who had witnessed what he witnessed in Colombia, who had decided something about himself the moment it happened, started talking publicly about why. Studio passing on a film does not come with a timeline. Threat does. By the end of this, you will know the name he keeps saying when the cameras are on him. You will know who he is pointing at, and then why the people who could stop this have not. But first, you need to understand what they told every executive in Hollywood and why almost all of them listened. Before we go further, subscribe. You will not want to miss how this ends. He is on a film set in Colombia. The production is moving, crew around him. Normal day, or what passes for normal when you are shooting in that part of the world. And then someone approaches, not carefully, not quietly, in broad daylight, casually, the way you offer something you have sold 100 times before. Individuals connected to the exploitation network walk up to his crew and offer them children. Just like that, Caviezel has told this story publicly, across multiple appearances, in his own words. He does not dress it up. He says what happened, and he lets it sit there. The question is not what those men did. The question is what you do with something you cannot unfeel. What you do when you have looked directly at it and now you have to decide. Do you go back to your career, or do you become someone who cannot pretend he did not see it? Jim Caviezel made a decision in Colombia. Everything that happened to him after, every door that closed, every executive that went quiet, every label that got attached to his name, it all started there.
We're shining a light on something they don't want shined on. Media is not helping you, it's hindering you. And the mainstream media has not done a good job in, horrible as far as telling us what's going on at the open borders. You know, we lost children last year.
He came back from Colombia with something he needed to say. The film was called Sound of Freedom. Budget, $14.5 million. Based on the documented fieldwork of a real operative. Real rescues, real networks, real children recovered from real exploitation operations across Latin America. This was not a faith-based vanity project. The receipts existed. The operations were on record. Caviezel brought it to Hollywood. He had reason to believe they would get behind it. He was a name. Passion of the Christ had grossed $612 million worldwide. He understood the industry. He had worked inside it for decades. And this was a film about rescuing children. Not a controversial subject, not a political grenade, not something any studio executive should have had trouble attaching their name to. He expected Hollywood to be what it told the world it was. The moral authority, the place that amplified survivors, the machine that had spent years positioning itself as the conscience of the culture. He walked in believing that. Stay locked in, because what he walked out with was something else entirely. The word went out. Not suggestions, not development notes, not the ordinary silence of a studio passing on a project that doesn't fit their slate. Every major studio, every major network, instructed to stay away from a finished film about rescuing children from documented exploitation networks. Caviezel documents the phrasing himself, on camera, across multiple public appearances. You will be done. You will be finished in 3 years. That is a deadline. That is a threat with a timeline attached to it. And here is where the story gets bigger than one actor and one film. Because for a threat like that to land, for every executive in Hollywood to hear it and comply, you need the machine to be real. You need the people at the center of it to carry genuine weight. You need faces the culture trusts completely. Oprah Winfrey built a school for girls from disadvantaged backgrounds in South Africa. She spent more than $40 million of her own money. She stood on stages and amplified survivors. She was the voice the culture turned to when it needed someone to tell it what was right and what was wrong. The face of moral authority in Hollywood. That is exactly what made her useful to the machine. Tell me something. When you find out a studio was told to stay away from a film about rescuing children, does that make you angry? Or does it just confirm something you already knew? Drop it below.
A lot of the agencies are involved at the highest level.
Let's be real about who Jim Caviezel actually is before we go any further. This is not a man who stumbled into controversy. He is not a fringe figure who wandered in from outside the industry. Passion of the Christ. 2004. $612 million at the global box office, one of the highest grossing independent films ever made. He carried that film on his back, physically and professionally, and came out the other side as a genuine Hollywood name. He had something to lose. That matters because the easiest way to dismiss someone who starts naming networks and agencies and patterns of institutional failure is to say they never had anything in the first place. That this is a man with nothing left to protect, swinging at shadows. That is not this man. He went to Colombia for a film. He witnessed what he witnessed. He came back and spent years getting Sound of Freedom made. Not as a crusade, as a film. A real production, a real story. And when Hollywood closed every door, he did not go quiet. He started talking, publicly, on camera, with specificity. Once you name names in this industry, you are not an actor anymore. You are a target. Caviezel knew that. He did it anyway. And then came the part nobody saw coming. There is a name that sits underneath all of this. Jeffrey Epstein. You already know it. Everybody does. He is not the subject of this story. He is the threshold, the documented entry point to a pattern that was always larger than one individual. He ran a network. He was connected, protected, and operational for years. The institutions responsible for stopping it were watching. In August 2019, Jeffrey Epstein died in federal custody at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. The official ruling: suicide. The documented facts around that ruling: the surveillance equipment outside his cell malfunctioned. His cellmate had been transferred the night before. 2 guards were asleep during required checks. Those are not theories. Those are the documented facts in the public record. And the documents, the thousands of pages of depositions, filings, names, they were sealed. For years, it took sustained legal pressure and public demand to force the unsealing. That process began in January 2024. The names in those documents are real. But nah, we ain't getting to that part yet, because before the documents arrived, something else had to happen first. And what happened next is where this story stops being about one film and one actor and becomes about the machine itself. 5 years. That is how long Sound of Freedom sat on a shelf. A finished film, real fieldwork, real operations behind it. Disney acquired it through a corporate purchase and shelved it. Netflix passed. Amazon passed. The producer bought the rights back himself and spent half a decade looking for anyone willing to distribute a film about rescuing children from documented exploitation networks. Nobody in Hollywood would touch it. Caviezel understood what that meant. This was not a market calculation. Studios do not issue timelines when they pass on a film. They do not tell an actor he will be finished in 3 years. That is not a development note. That is a warning, delivered by people with enough weight behind them to make it stick. The code in Hollywood works the same way it works everywhere else. You protect the people who gave you access, or you lose it. Caviezel had broken that code, and the machine did not need to do anything dramatic. It just stopped calling. The film released anyway, July 4th, 2023. Angel Studios crowdfunded 7,000 individual investors. They raised $5 million in 2 weeks and betted on a movie every major player in Hollywood had walked away from. $14 million on the first day, $251 million globally by the end of the run. And the director of that film, Alejandro Monteverde, watched all of it happen and then did something that stung harder than any studio door closing. He went public, August 2023, Variety, The Guardian, El País. On record, with his name attached, he said Caviezel's public statements had hurt his work. He said, on this particular film, yes, it did hurt my work. And that's why I'm here talking now. The man who spent years building a film about exposing exploitation networks was now publicly distancing himself from the actor who was exposing them. Whatever Monteverde's reasoning, and the documented record shows a man caught between protecting the film's reach and standing behind his lead, the effect was immediate. Opponents had a verified quote from the director himself, and they used it. The label came next. Mainstream media attached Sound of Freedom to a conspiracy movement that did not exist when the film was made. Monteverdi had started writing the script in 2015. The movement it got tagged with emerged years later. That is not overlap, that is retrofit. But the label stuck, and here is where it gets real, because that is exactly what the playbook calls for. Here is what Caviezel did when the label landed. He went further. At conferences across the country, on camera, with his name attached in his own voice, he named the network above the individual everyone already knew about. He said the agencies responsible for stopping this were part of it. He used specific language, the eight-armed octopus. At the Health and Freedom Conference in 2021, documented public appearance on record, the individual at the center was one arm. Remove one arm and it grows back. You have to take the head. That is not a theorist. That is a documented witness making documented public claims at personal cost. And then he cited a number. Per government data, per a New York Times investigation drawing on records from the Office of Refugee Resettlement, over a 2-year period, HHS lost contact with 85,000 unaccompanied children after they left federal custody. 1/3 of the children the agency was responsible for tracking. Gone. The agency's own numbers. A whistleblower inside HHS testified before Congress that the U.S. government had become, in her words, the middleman in a child exploitation operation. No theory attached to that, no movement, no label, just a number, and a silence where the follow-up question should be. Nobody is asking where they went. Jeffrey Epstein died on August 5, 2019, in federal custody at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. The official ruling, suicide. Here are the documented facts around that ruling. His cellmate had been transferred the night before. The surveillance equipment outside his cell malfunctioned during the window when he died. 2 guards assigned to check on him every 30 minutes were asleep. Both guards were later charged with falsifying prison records. The official conclusion did not change. Those anomalies are not a theory. They are in the public record. Every one of them confirmed. The question is not whether they exist. They do. The question is what you do with a set of documented facts that the official ruling does not account for. The narrator is not going to close that gap for you. What the documented picture shows is this. The man at the center of a network connected to some of the most powerful individuals on the planet died in federal custody under conditions that a federal investigation later described as a perfect storm of negligence, and every person in that network who had not yet been cross-examined by a prosecutor in open court never was. That silence is hitting different now. The documents were sealed. For years, the filings from civil proceedings against Epstein and his associates sat behind court orders. Names, depositions, testimony, thousands of pages. It took sustained legal pressure, repeated court battles, and years of public demand to force the unsealing. It began in January 2024. The names that emerged were not unknown. Prince Andrew, accused of sexual assault by Virginia Giuffre, documented in the filings. Bill Clinton, mentioned in depositions. David Copperfield, identified as an associate. Stephen Hawking, listed as a guest. These were not names from the margins. These were names from television sets and philanthropy galas and award show stages. Names the culture had decided, collectively, to trust. And here is where it gets complicated. Because the same moment the documents dropped, social media filled with lists. Names attached to Epstein that were not in the filings. Claims that spread faster than the actual court documents, and one name appeared on those lists more than almost any other, Oprah Winfrey. Stay locked in, because what the documents actually confirm about that name and what they do not, those are 2 different things, and the difference between them is the whole story.
From Rupert Murdoch, from Fox, to every studio. Look, if you touch this thing, you will be out, you will be done. You'll be finished in 3 years.
This is important to state clearly. Oprah Winfrey's name does not appear in the January 2024 unsealed Epstein documents. Multiple news outlets investigated the social media lists and identified them as misinformation. The court filings do not place her in the network. That is the documented record. It matters, and it gets stated here, plainly, because the architecture of this story does not need a false claim to stand up. What the documented record does show is something different. January 2007. The Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls opened south of Johannesburg, South Africa. More than $40 million of her own money. 152 girls from disadvantaged backgrounds. She flew there personally for the opening. It was exactly what it looked like. a genuine act of institutional philanthropy from a woman who had survived abuse herself and understood what it cost. By the end of that same year, a dormitory matron at the school, Tiny Virginia Makopo, 27 years old, was arrested, charged by the Family Violence, Child Protection, and Sexual Offenses Unit. 14 counts, indecent assault, soliciting minors, 9 girls aged 13 to 15 testified against her. Winfrey flew back to South Africa, told a press conference she had lost confidence in the headmistress, said she would be cleaning house from top to bottom. The headmistress sued her for defamation. Winfrey settled out of court in March 2010. In October 2010, Tiny Virginia Makopo was acquitted. The magistrate cited contradictions in the testimony of the girls. The state did not appeal. Track A, a man whose film nobody would distribute, saying the network runs deeper than one name. Track B, a documented institutional failure at the school of the woman who legitimized the machine that buried his film. Both tracks, same moment, same question underneath all of it. Before I show you what the documents actually confirmed, do you think the people whose names appear in those filings knew exactly what they were part of? Drop it in the comments right now. I want the number. Before I tell you what happened next, do you believe the people whose names appear in those filings knew exactly what they were part of? Drop it in the comments right now. I want the number. The documents arrived, and the names were real. Not the social media lists, not the theories, the actual unsealed court filings. Thousands of pages of depositions and testimony from civil proceedings that powerful people had spent years keeping behind court orders. Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, David Copperfield. Names the culture had decided to trust. In the documents, on the record. Caviezel had been saying for years that the network ran deeper than one individual, that removing one arm does not kill it, that the agencies responsible for addressing it were compromised at the highest levels. He said it on camera, at documented public appearances, with his name attached. The documents arrived, and the pattern he described, a protected network, connected to power, insulated from accountability, was sitting there in the public record without a single theory required to see it. That is the convergence, and not a conclusion, a collision. 2 tracks, one man's career destroyed for naming something, and the documented unsealing of the thing he named, arriving at the same point at the same time. The documents arrived, and the names were real. Investigation mode is over. Here is what the documented picture actually shows. Separate from every theory, separate from every label, separate from every movement that attached itself to this story without being invited. Jim Caviezel, Health and Freedom Conference 2021, documented public appearance on record, his words. The individual at the center of the network was one arm. Remove one arm and it grows back. You have to take the head. He described a structure, not a single predator, not an isolated case, but an entity with architecture, protected, resourced, connected to institutions that were supposed to be dismantling it. He has said on camera across multiple documented appearances, we've come to a very, very dark place on Hollywood's current state. Mainstream media is not helping you, it's hindering you. They've done a horrible job. He has said, a lot of agencies are involved at the highest level. That is what he said, on camera. That is the documented record. Here is the epistemic signal that has to land before anything else. Stating what a man said publicly is not the same as confirming what he said is true. Those are 2 separate things. Once you name names, you are not an actor anymore. You are a target, and targets get dismissed. That is the machine's most effective tool. Not silence, not a closed door, but a label that makes everything you say sound like noise. Let's deal with the 3 hardest counter-arguments directly, because if you are watching this and thinking clearly, you already have them loaded. First, Hollywood passed on Sound of Freedom because it was a commercial risk, a faith-based film with a controversial lead actor and a subject matter that courts a politically charged audience. Studios make market calculations. No conspiracy required to explain a pass. That argument holds until you look at the specific phrasing Caviezel documents. A studio passing on a film does not come with a timeline. Development notes do not include deadlines. You will be done. You will be finished in 3 years. That is not a market calculation. That is a threat with a clock attached to it. The specificity of the phrasing is the shield. Hold that. Second, the QAnon label. And I know what you are about to say. The overlap was real. It was not invented from nothing. The promotional ecosystem around Sound of Freedom did intersect with those networks during its release. That is documented, and it is fair to say so. But the film was completed in 2018. The movement it was labeled with emerged after that. That is not overlap. That is retrofit. A label applied years after the fact to a finished product does not describe the product's origins. It describes the machine's response to it. Third, Oprah's name and the Epstein documents. I know what you are about to say here too. What the documents confirm and what they do not. Those are two different things. Her name does not appear in the January 2024 unsealed filings. That is the documented record, and it gets stated plainly. Proximity to powerful people who were later exposed is not participation. Appearing on a social media list is not a court filing. The gap between those two things does not get closed here, because the documented picture does not close it. What the documented picture does show, the school, the settlement, the pattern of institutional adjacency, that is a different question. And it is a question worth sitting with. Every character in this story gets both moments. That is the code. You do not get to be pure anything. Jim Caviezel, he witnessed exploitation being offered to his crew in broad daylight in Colombia. He could not unfeel it. He poured his career and his credibility into a film he believed would force a reckoning. And when Hollywood closed every door, he kept talking, publicly, at personal cost, with his name attached. That is the sympathetic moment. It is real, and it earns its place. The condemned moment, his public statements became so entangled with unverified framing that the director of his own film felt compelled to disown him on the record. Whatever Caviezel's intent, and the documented record shows a man who genuinely cannot stop saying what he saw. The effect is documented. He handed opponents the single most effective tool available to dismiss the legitimate case. A man can be right about the pattern and still make it impossible for others to say so. That is the violation. Oprah Winfrey, she built a school for girls from disadvantaged backgrounds and spent $40 million of her own money doing it. She used her platform to amplify survivors during the Me Too period. She is herself a documented survivor of abuse. That is real. It does not get erased. The condemned moment. A staff member in a position of trust at her school was arrested on 14 counts of indecent acts against students aged 13 to 15. Winfrey settled a defamation lawsuit brought by the headmistress out of court. The staff member was ultimately acquitted on contradictions in testimony. The pattern, not of guilt, but of proximity to institutional failure in spaces she controlled and funded, sits in the documented record without resolution. Jeffrey Epstein. There is no version of this story where he is the human one. Alejandro Monteverde built Sound of Freedom over years with documented intent to expose real exploitation networks. He faced an impossible position: protect the film's reach or stand behind his lead actor. The sympathetic moment is real. The condemned moment is also real. His public distancing gave opponents a verified quote from inside the film itself. Whatever the intent, the effect is documented. It became the single most cited counter-argument against the film's legitimacy. Anne Heche died on August 5, 2022, following a single vehicle incident in Los Angeles. The official ruling: accident. Toxicology confirmed substances were present in her system. That is the documented record. It gets stated with that attribution and no other. Nobody put this on record as anything other than an accident. What people close to her have said, on record, is different. And I am going to tell you both. People close to Heche have stated publicly that she was working on a documentary project at the time of her death. No primary source confirms the specific title or subject matter attributed to that project in the accounts that have circulated. The competitor framing, that she was silenced, that her death was not what the official record says it was, originates entirely from people who knew her personally and have an emotional stake in an alternative explanation. That matters. It does not disqualify them. The people saying this knew her. They had access to her directly. Their testimony is not proof. It is testimony. And the distance between what they have said on record and what the official ruling confirms, that gap does not get closed here. The word silence does not appear in this script. The word murder does not appear in this script. What appears is this: a woman died. People close to her believe the official record does not account for everything. The official record has not changed. That is where the documented picture stops. Everything beyond it is a question the evidence does not currently answer. Before the verdict lands, you need to know who is delivering it. Tim Ballard, former Special Agent, Department of Homeland Security, the real individual whose documented fieldwork is the factual backbone of Sound of Freedom. Real operations, real rescues, real networks dismantled across Latin America. His operational record exists independent of the film and independent of Caviezel's public statements. State that clearly, then state this just as clearly. In July 2023, the same month Sound of Freedom released, Ballard was forced to resign as CEO of Operation Underground Railroad following an internal investigation into sexual misconduct. An independent law firm concluded he had violated organizational policies and engaged in unprofessional behavior. In September 2023, he was excommunicated from the LDS Church. In October 2023, 5 women filed a lawsuit accusing him of sexual assault and grooming. A federal trafficking lawsuit followed in October 2024. In November 2025, the Salt Lake County District Attorney declined to file criminal charges, citing insufficient admissible evidence. 2 civil lawsuits were dismissed with prejudice. Ballard denied all allegations and called them baseless. He is not a neutral party. He has a direct personal and professional stake in the film's credibility. That conflict of interest gets named before his verdict lands, not after. Now here are the 3 voices, and the viewer resolves them. Caviezel, the prophet, full indictment. The network has architecture. The agencies are compromised. He has been saying it at documented public appearances for years at personal cost. He names, he does not stop. Monteverde, the pragmatist. He built the film. He watched Caviezel's statements attach a label to it that the film could not survive commercially. His position is not that Caviezel is wrong. His position is documented. The minute they started labeling it with conspiracy theories, it discredits the purity of the work. That is what he said. On record. Ballard, the operative. He does not deal in theories. He deals in documented operational records. Rescues on file, networks dismantled, children recovered. Whatever you conclude about his personal conduct, whatever you conclude about the allegations, the operational record exists independent of the man. And the gap between what one field operative documented and what scaled institutional response has achieved, that gap is the verdict. 3 voices, the prophet, the pragmatist, the operative, they do not agree. The viewer decides what that means. Here is what I think happened, and I am standing on that. The documented exploitation network was real. The institutional resistance to dismantling it was real. The film that exposed it was real. $251 million at the global box office, built on the fieldwork of a real operative, distributed by 7,000 individual investors after every major player in Hollywood walked away. And the most effective thing the machine ever did was not bury the film. It did not need to. The film made $250 million. The most effective thing it did was attach a label, because once the label landed, every legitimate question the documented record raises, the surveillance failures, the sealed names, the 85,000 children HHS lost contact with, the specific phrasing of a threat that came with a 3-year timeline, every single one of those questions could be dismissed with a single word. He broke protocol. Everyone who was watching knew exactly what that meant, not because he was wrong, because he gave the machine exactly what it needed to make him look like he was. That is not a coincidence. That is how the machine handles a loose thread, not with a closed door, not with a threat, with a word. One word, deployed loudly enough for long enough, until even the people who can see the documented picture decide it is safer to look away. Here is the strip. No theories, no names that haven't been confirmed, just what the documented record actually shows. Sound of Freedom was a finished film. Budget, $14.5 million. A real story. Real fieldwork behind it. Every major studio passed. Disney acquired it through a corporate purchase and shelved it. Netflix passed. Amazon passed. The film sat in limbo for 5 years. When it finally released, through a crowd-funded distributor on July 4th, 2023, it made $14 million on its first day, $251 million globally by the time the run was done. The Epstein documents were unsealed in January 2024. The names were real: Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, David Copperfield. The surveillance equipment outside Epstein's cell malfunctioned the night he died. His cellmate had been transferred. The official ruling was suicide. Those are the documented facts. And per the Office of Refugee Resettlement, per a New York Times investigation drawing on government data, over a 2-year period, HHS lost contact with 85,000 unaccompanied children after they left federal custody. The agency's own numbers, no theory required. That picture exists without Caviezel, without a movement, without a label attached to it. The story was never about one actor, it was about what the documented record looks like when the people responsible for reading it decide not to. The most effective cover is not a lie, it is a label. Call something a conspiracy theory loudly enough, and even the people who can see the evidence will look away. One question before you go. Do you think Caviezel is a genuine truth-teller who paid the price for speaking, or someone whose real story got hijacked by a movement that needed a face? Drop it below.